This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 138 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about how you can make cooperative learning work better in your classroom. As a middle school English teacher, I incorporated plenty of group work into my instruction. I did it for a number of reasons. Sometimes it was because a task seemed like a natural fit for cooperative learning, like days when I wanted students to brainstorm ideas together. Other times it was just to mix things up and do something different. And then there was the fewer grades principle. If I had 120 students and I gave an assignment to groups of 4, that meant I would only have to grade 30 final products rather than 120. It didn't always go well, though. Student contributions were uneven. Some groups were better at staying on task than others. A lot of time got wasted. Personalities conflicted. Absences created logistical headaches. Not only did I observe these problems as a teacher, I had also experienced them plenty of times as a participant in group projects. I was the classic just let me do it all person. Sensing early on in most situations that other group members weren't going to add much value, I ended up taking on most of the work myself. Despite it all, I never quite gave up on cooperative learning as a teacher. Not only did I believe in its inherent value, that as humans we need regular practice in working together on things, but I knew that research said it was a good thing. At least I was pretty sure it did. As I talk with teachers about this, I'm finding that my experiences have been fairly typical. Many of us want to use cooperative learning in our classrooms, but we wish we could get it to work better. So I went in search of answers by taking a look at the research and then asking for help in 2 tweets. And now I have the answers to 2 questions. First, is cooperative learning worth it? What does the research say? Beyond academic research, are there philosophical human reasons we should keep taking it on? Second, how do we solve some of the most common problems with cooperative learning? After seeking input from scores of teachers and mining my own experiences, I've settled on a list of 4 of the most pressing issues with cooperative learning. For each one, I'll share some of the most effective solutions coming from practicing classroom teachers and organizations that have developed formal systems for collaborative work. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Participate for sponsoring this episode. Participate is a free community learning platform that combines your favorite parts of social media and online learning. Connect with other educators, take self-paced courses based on your interests, design ready-to-use unit plans, and get recognized for your work, all in one place. Participate is home to dozens of free communities and thousands of adult learners collaborating around topics such as the global goals, project-based learning, and social learning. Get started today with Participate's free project-based learning community at go.participate.com/pedagogy. Support for this episode also comes from our friends at Pear Deck. One of the reasons I love Pear Deck is because it was founded by educators. These educators have designed the products to support instructional best practices known to improve student outcomes. Pear Deck's seamless integration with Google Slides and Microsoft PowerPoint make it easy to build interactive presentations you can send straight to student devices and generate 100% student engagement. Better yet, these presentations give teachers real-time insight into student thinking and understanding so they can react as necessary and seize teachable moments. And here's some great news. Pear Deck is offering my listeners a free 60-day premium access trial. To redeem it, just go to peardeck.com/cultofpedagogy. Now, let's talk about cooperative learning. First, we're going to talk about this question of, is cooperative learning worth it? If most of the cooperative learning we implement only gives us lukewarm results, it makes sense to ask if we should even bother. Why not just have students work alone all the time? So first, let's take a look at what the research says, and I'm going to keep this brief. Rather than dig through piles of studies on cooperative learning, I found one big comprehensive overview that goes over decades of research that has been done on the subject. And if you go over to the post, I'm going to have links to all of these things. Just go to cultofpedagogy.com, click podcasts, and choose episode 138. So here is the big takeaway from this overview. In general, when students work together, they make greater academic and social gains than when they compete against one another or when they work individually. But merely putting students into groups is not enough to realize these gains. To be effective, cooperative work needs to be structured so that it embodies 5 key components. The first one is positive interdependence. Group members must work together to achieve a common goal. They need to depend on each other to make this happen. The second component is individual accountability. Each member needs to be responsible for doing his or her part. The third is promotive interaction. This means that group members help, support, and encourage each other. The fourth component is effective interpersonal skills. In these groups, students are taught how to communicate, how to solve problems, how to resolve conflicts effectively. And then the fifth component is group processing. Groups are given time to reflect on how well their group functioned and to make plans for improvement. So if group work actually has these components in it, then you are going to see those gains. If you just throw students together and say work together, it's not necessarily going to give you those benefits. Now, beyond the research, are there other reasons why cooperative learning matters in the 21st century? I think there are. Apart from the academic and social gains cooperative learning has offered for generations, we now find ourselves in an era where it may be more essential than ever before. For one thing, it gives students practice in the kind of skills that are becoming more desirable in the workplace. There is an organization called P21, and they've got something called the Framework for 21st Century Learning. And in that, they identify sort of the essential skills that people need to function well in the 21st century. Collaboration is included as one of its essential skills. This is because as manufacturing is automated and information can be obtained with a few clicks, higher level skills like communication, creativity, and collaboration are more valued. These are skills computers can't really replicate. The work of human beings is going to involve more and more of those kinds of skills in professional spaces, higher education, and community life. So there's sort of a preparation for work and life reason for us to be doing collaborative work in the classroom. Now, on a deeper level, we need cooperative learning because technology is really starting to limit our face-to-face communication. Even when we're in school together, we are on devices so much of the time. This can be wonderful and efficient, and it offers so many more opportunities to expose ourselves to new ideas. But it is stunting our ability to have regular conversations and robbing us of all the gifts that come with those interactions. Giving students regular opportunities to share physical space and actually talk through complex problems is a gift they may not get anywhere else. So yes, it's worth it. So that was the answer to the first question, whether or not it is worth it to even do this. Now what we're going to do is look at 4 common problems with cooperative learning and some solutions to those. The first one is a biggie, and it has a lot of solutions. So let's dig into that first one. The first problem is student contributions are uneven, sometimes vastly uneven. It came as no surprise to me that this was the most frequently mentioned drawback teachers experience with cooperative learning. This problem shows up in different ways. The academically strong students end up doing all the work, while others slack off or give up because they can't find a way in. Or maybe students contribute an equal amount, but they don't actually work together. Instead, they just divide up the work and then copy off of each other's papers. Unfortunately, many teachers assume this problem is caused by students not wanting to work together. But I think it often comes down to 2 larger issues. First, students haven't been taught collaborative skills. And second, the task has not been structured for true collaboration. So solving this problem is not simple or one-dimensional. It'll most likely require several different approaches. Explicitly teaching collaborative skills, using some type of structure so that roles and procedures are more clearly defined, and setting norms and expectations ahead of time. So we're going to take these one at a time. So we're still dealing with this first problem of uneven student contributions. So the first one is to explicitly teach collaborative skills. If students are going to do good collaborative work, they need to be explicitly taught those skills. So here are a couple of thoughts on that. First, teach these skills in the same way that you would teach academic material. Do role plays, model the behavior you want to see, do demonstrations of what not to do. If needed, reteach the skills throughout the year. Do not assume students have already been taught how to collaborate or that they should know better. Chances are very good that neither of these are true. When you are teaching these skills, start by training them by working on shorter, easier projects at first, and then have students reflect on how well they collaborated. Only have them tackle a bigger project after they have mastered the collaboration skills. This was suggested by a teacher on Twitter, and to me, it was like the biggest, duh. I would always have my students get together in groups without really doing any kind of practice on collaboration. And so the idea of having them collaborate on something really light and simple before you actually start doing the heavy academic work, to me is brilliant, and I don't know why everybody isn't doing it. And then also, if you're going to be teaching collaborative skills, you need to identify what those skills are. One really good set of resources comes from a group called PBL Works. On their website, you can actually download rubrics for assessing collaborative work. Now, whether you use these rubrics to actually perform the assessment, you can still use them to identify the skills needed for effective collaboration. So that might provide you with a really good list of skills to go over with your students and talk about, what those actually look like in practice. Again, links to these are over on the website. Okay, so tackling this problem of uneven student contribution, one way to deal with that is to teach them collaborative skills. The second way to solve this problem is to use cooperative structures. When I was in the classroom, I rarely did anything to actually structure group work. I was barely even aware that formal structures existed for this type of thing. Since then, I have learned that quite a few of these have been developed to provide a framework for collaborative tasks. Now, I'm going to give you a list of some of these, and again, links to all of the more specific details are over on the website, but I'll try to sort of summarize them. For many of these, you're going to need a little bit of PD or training. So this would be the kind of thing to look over with a team of colleagues to see which one looks like it might be a good fit, maybe talk to some people who are using it, and then see about maybe getting some training. Okay, so the first structure is called team-based learning, which is one of those names that's kind of hard to recognize as an actual brand name. And when someone recommended it, I said, is that a brand name? Because it sounds just like a generic term, but it's apparently a thing. It's popular in medical schools, but people have said that you can also use it in K through 12. This actually groups students into heterogeneous teams that stay the same over the course of a whole semester. And one of the things that's sort of a hallmark of it is that it's got a lot of preparation work before students actually get into the groups, and it gives them a readiness test before they even start the group work. So there's a lot of front loading that's done to make sure students are actually ready to participate equitably in the group. So this team-based learning is really good for courses where students are expected to demonstrate learning, and master a large body of just content. Again, this is probably why it was popular in medical schools. So if your teaching involves students sort of absorbing and remembering a lot of content, that would be one to look into. The second one is called Agile Project Management, or Agile. This comes from the world of software development, and this is better for managing sort of large, complex projects. It breaks these large projects into shorter cycles where little parts of the project are developed and then assessed for quality so that the team can make changes as they go. Two forms that this comes in are called Kanban and Scrum. They're really interesting names, and there's even a version of Scrum that's been developed for schools called EduScrum. So if you are in something where students are coming up with creative solutions to problems rather than a course that's driven by knowledge acquisition, Agile would be something to take a look at. Another one is called POGLE, which is an acronym for Process-Oriented Guided Inquiry Learning. This is most often used in science courses, but it can be done in other content areas as well. Students are assigned to self-managed teams, and they're given specific roles to work through activities that are designed to deepen their understanding of the content. Just like with team-based learning, this seems to be best suited for courses that are heavy in content rather than those that focus on individual creativity or skills. So we've talked about a couple of different structures so far: team-based learning, agile project management, POGLE, and then a couple more: Kagan, cooperative learning structures, or people sometimes will just refer to them as Kagan structures. And probably if you've been teaching for a while, especially if you teach in K through 8, you have heard of Kagan, because Kagan is kind of a well-known name in cooperative learning. Kagan structures, I believe there are up to 200 of these, or close to that. There's lots and lots of these sort of simple structures. Some that are fairly well known are quiz, trade, and numbered heads together. And they're just different structures for students to participate cooperatively in really clearly designated ways. So that's another one, Kagan structures. And then two more. One is called Solve in Time, which is something I'd never heard of until I asked on Twitter. And it's just sort of a process that gives you steps for clearly defining a problem, researching it and understanding it, and then coming up with a solution. So that may be another one. And then finally, I threw this in there, which is Jigsaw. And Jigsaw is another sort of classic one. It's not necessarily designed for long-term projects, but for getting students to work together just to learn a body of information as a group. If you're not familiar with it, it's just where each group member is responsible for learning a chunk of the material and then teaching it to the rest of the group. And I've got links to information on how to implement that. So when you have the problem of student contributions being uneven, you can teach them collaborative skills. You can use one of these structures that more clearly defines the process and the roles. And then another thing that you can do is establish norms and expectations ahead of time. So rather than solve problems only when they come up, many teachers will have students create group contracts before they start work. These are developed with input from all group members. The contracts outline the members' expectations. They describe how students will respond when specific problems arise. And so they can really be great for just setting everybody's expectation ahead of time. This is another thing that I never did when I worked with groups. So it's no wonder that my cooperative learning groups really didn't work that well. So over on the blog post, I've given you 2 different links to articles that describe how to actually build these contracts. Okay, so that was just the first problem, but that was the biggest one, this whole idea of students not contributing evenly. So there are a lot of different ideas and solutions that you can try to improve this. The second problem that a lot of teachers experience with collaborative work is interpersonal conflicts interfere with productivity. Sometimes students just can't get along well enough to work together. These conflicts sometimes exist prior to a group's formation. Students might have a history with one another that has nothing to do with your class. Personal problems can also arrive after group work starts as students discover personality traits that create irritation or conflict. These kind of problems should not be treated lightly. When students don't feel socially or emotionally comfortable with other group members, they won't be willing to take the kinds of risks that are necessary for learning. In a 2-year study, Google interviewed hundreds of its employees to determine what qualities made some teams more successful than others. They identified 5 key traits, and the one they said was most important was psychological safety. In other words, if people didn't feel sort of psychologically and emotionally safe with their group members, they were not going to make a lot of progress as a group. Similarly, a 2017 University of Washington study reported that students who felt more comfortable in their group showed a 27% increase in content mastery over those who did not. So, it's really easy sometimes for teachers to just kind of be like, oh, these kids just don't want to work together or whatever, but it's something that really can get in the way. So here are some ways that teachers have optimized interpersonal dynamics in groups. One is to start with team building. For teams that are going to stay together for more than a class period, it's worth it to delay the academic work at first and focus on building the team relationship. One way to do this is just through simple team building games and activities. And I'm going to recommend a website for you to look at. It's called Playmeo. That's PLAYMEO.com. It's just a website that has a whole bunch of games that you can play. These are game ideas or instructions for like physical in-person games. So I would recommend that you check that out. Probably a lot of people know of other team building games and activities, but just doing something really simple, even like those minute to win it games, or sort of like design challenges or something like that, it gets the students a little bit more comfortable with each other and sort of prepares them to work together on something else. So team building exercises, survey students. Two different ways that you can survey them. You can survey them ahead of time before creating groups, having students complete a form that will indicate which classmates they would prefer to work with and if there are any that they would rather not. Recognize that for some students, the reasons for not wanting to work together could run deep with painful memories. Do not dismiss preferences as students just wanting to work with their friends. Even though that may be true for a lot of them, there are significant reasons why they may not want to work with other students. And so if you can accommodate those preferences, you're just going to end up making your life easier in the long run. Another time to survey students is during group work. Some teachers will have students complete daily reflection sheets where they indicate how well they felt their group worked together that day. These can help you detect problems early on so that they can be addressed right away. And then the other thing is to work with students to problem solve. In some cases, rearranging groups or allowing some students to work independently may be the most logical solution. But at other times, the teacher can work with students who struggle in groups to develop better social and collaborative skills. Elementary teacher Erin Gannon used some of the above solutions with a student whose dominant personality and poor impulse control made others ask to not be grouped with her. Gannon worked with the student one-on-one to practice strategies for giving others more opportunity to lead. She also talked privately with the other group members. Here's what she says. We all came up with a plan together for what would happen if she started to feel prickly. She wasn't perfect, but they genuinely cheered her on when she had good days. It took a lot of work, but I would have devoted the same attention to an academic need. She was an excellent student, very sweet, with great leadership abilities, but that trouble working with others could really have hurt her down the road. I think my other students really needed to better understand the situation and not just shun her. If students are working in teams, there should be a sense that we are all responsible for each other's success. Empowering them to be part of the solution is pretty powerful. I really liked that story, and I liked this idea of taking this social skill, or maybe sort of this deficit in a social skill, as seriously as an academic need. And I think if more teachers could do something like this, as opposed to just sort of throwing our hands up and saying, oh, well, I guess it's just not working, you can end up changing a kid's life. Okay, so we have dealt with the first two major problems, and these are the sort of the big, really big ones. The first one is that students collaborate unevenly. They participate unevenly in groups. The second one was the interpersonal conflict problem. So the third problem is off-task behavior wastes time. So whether it's excessive talking, inappropriate device use, or general fooling around, a lot of cooperative time can be wasted when students just aren't doing the work they're supposed to be doing. So here are a couple of ways to tackle this problem. The first is to do check-ins. Establish specific tasks or benchmarks that groups need to complete and show you when they're done. Breaking the larger project into smaller tasks not only keeps everyone moving, it can also tell you which groups are starting to fall behind the others. These check-ins can be required for individuals or for whole groups or both. And some teachers assign points or grades for these to add extra incentive. Another way to keep kids a little bit more on track is using a timer. A lot of teachers said that setting a timer for the completion of certain tasks just helped keep groups moving. And then the third one is a little bit deeper and more holistic. Look at your assignment. Students may be having trouble focusing on the task because it doesn't really engage them. Maybe it's not personally meaningful to them. Maybe it's too easy. Maybe it's too confusing. Any of these shortcomings can make it much more difficult for students to stay on task. And no matter how many checks you put in place, if it's an uninspired or poorly designed assignment, you'll be fighting an uphill battle the whole time. So it may be time to just rethink the whole thing. The fourth problem, and the last one, is that student absences can throw everything off. Now, ideally, all of your group members will be present for the whole lifespan of a project. But things happen, and the longer the project, the more likely you are to have absent students. One missed day is usually not a big deal, but if a student misses multiple work days when the group should be actively collaborating, it becomes much harder for that person to make an equal contribution. So here are some ways that teachers have found to work around this issue. And I've broken these into actual chunks because there's 3 chunks of solutions. There's a lot of solutions that teachers gave me for this. So the first chunk I'm calling plan ahead. You can design projects where some components require all group members' participation, but others are done by individuals and might even be considered like to have rather than must have components. That way, if one person is unable to do their part, that part can just be dropped without impacting the whole project. Another way of planning ahead is to make sure that roles and responsibilities are clearly defined ahead of time for each student so that the work doesn't just get pushed around randomly. If a student is absent for a few days, it's clear what they need to do to catch up. And if they are unable to do it, the other group members can decide who takes on that person's tasks. And then a third way to plan ahead is to have students set goals together and include contingencies for absences in a group contract, like I talked about earlier. If they do this, then there will already be an agreed upon plan that they will just put into action whenever that student is absent. And students may come up with creative solutions that you never even thought of. So planning ahead for absences is a great way of dealing with them. Another option is to leverage technology. If you have students using a platform like a shared Google Drive or a HyperDoc for keeping all project materials in one cloud accessible place, then as long as the absentee has good home internet access and they are well enough to work, which is a serious consideration. If they're homesick, we should not be expecting them to keep up. But if they just sort of have, the remnants of a cold or something like that, then they can still keep at this project from home. So using something like a Google Drive, a shared Google Drive, is a way of doing that. Some teachers also allow groups to use Skype, FaceTime, or Google Hangouts to actually live video chat with the missing group member during class time. And if that is not an option, the students could still document their meeting with video and then share that with the student later, the student who's absent. So there are ways to use technology to sort of, correct for this absence. Okay, so technology is another solution for absences. And then, of course, you may have to course correct if the problem becomes too big. If a student's absence lasts long enough to impact the group and all of the other solutions aren't working, then what you may have to do is just redistribute the workload among the remaining members, remove that student from the group, and then give them an individual assignment that would replace the group task. If you spell this out ahead of time in the contract or in the rubric that you give students, then the process should be fairly straightforward. If students know that this is going to happen, it's not a punishment. It's just that they, in effect, have no longer, they're no longer part of the group anymore. And so and that's also something I never really thought of, Okay, so those are our 4 different major issues and lots of solutions. And then I just have a couple more random tips that sort of came up. The first one is, if you want things to go well, don't send collaborative work home. Because home environments vary so greatly and students have different access to materials, transportation, etc., it is really best to keep all collaborative work in the classroom. Moreover, expecting students to meet outside of class time, especially if they are younger and don't have their own transportation, will automatically create problems within groups and from group to group. So it really is, it's going to go better if you just keep all of that work at school. Another tip is keep groups to 3 to 4 students. This seems to be the general consensus from expert readings to talking with individual teachers. Once a group gets larger than 4, it becomes a lot easier for students to slip through the cracks. So the ideal number seems to be 3 to 4. And then finally, another thing that can sort of help you in this whole process is if you look into some collaborative technologies. Many schools are already using Google's collaborative tools, so you already sort of know about that. But there are other tools that have collaboration features that you may not be aware of. So I'm going to mention some of them here. There is a bunch of them that are made specifically for collaboration and project management, and these would be great for older students. I'd say middle school and up. Some of them are Trello, Asana, Kanbanchi, and Slack. This is one thing I love about working with technology is the names are always just quirky and funny. Okay, Trello, Asana, Kanbanchi, and Slack. And then there are other tools that are not collaboration tools, but they have collaborative, the capability to collaborate. So just 2 examples of those are Wakelet, which is a curation tool, and you can have multiple students working on the same curation board at the same time. And then a site like Canva, which is a graphic design site, you can have more than one person working on a Canva project at the same time. So these are great for students to collaborate on components of the project from pretty much anywhere that they have internet access. Okay, so the bottom line for all of this is this. If cooperative learning hasn't really worked for you in the past, do not lose hope. There are so many people out there who have come up with fantastic ways to get it right. So pick yourself and your students back up, try some of the stuff we've covered here, and see if you can make it better next time. For links to all the resources mentioned in this episode, visit cultivepedagogy.com, click podcast, and choose episode 138. To get a weekly email from me about my newest blog posts, podcast episodes, and products, sign up for my mailing list at cultivepedagogy.com/subscribe. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.